Hello and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Creating Training Content with AI, sponsored by CommLab India, ELB Learning, GP Strategies, MadCap, and Lemonade LXP. I'm Liz Spate, Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. If you would like to pop in the chat where you're coming from, I would love to see. I feel like we're all around the world today, so it's super exciting, so drop that into the chat. But before we get started, I would like to also quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's program. So throughout today's event, please feel free to use that chat window like you are to interact with our speaker with any comments, as well as questions. This will be an interactive session throughout, so don't hesitate to pop those questions in the chat. And at your end of your time with us today, you'll notice a short survey has popped open in your browser. We would appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us that will include the link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we would love to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, podcasts, and our membership. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms for us to continue the conversation. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's first session speakers. We have Jeff Fissel, the Vice President of Technology at GP Strategies. He drives the development and alignment of learning technology solutions and helps global organizations achieve transformative results. And then we have Matt Donovan, who is the Chief Learning and Initiative Officer at GP Strategies and is a seasoned expert in learning and development with over 25 years of experience. And with that, Jeff, take it away.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate that nice introduction. Let me replace the share and get the PowerPoint going here. All right. Did I do it right? We practiced a couple times. So,
Yes.
well, thank you all so much for joining me today. Matt Donovan will be hopping in soon. Of course, he was back to back, and I think is running a little behind in another session. So, just a heads up when you see him pop in, everyone say hi. I definitely will. So, I'm excited to talk with you today, like the title says, about how to get past the hype of expecting AI to do all the magic, be that magic button that's going to do everything for us and do it all perfectly. How do we actually start to use it and use it specifically in L&D? And as most people probably know about GP Strategies, I would say we're probably one of the largest employers of people in the learning industry in the world. And we've been working over the last couple of years to try to figure out how to best apply AI to help our people be able to do more, better, faster, and maybe even a little cheaper as well as we think through the processes. So we already kind of introduced we're already introduced, so I'll spend very little time here. Again, I'm going to come at it more from the technology side. When Matt gets on, he's going to talk a lot more about from the learning design principles inside of it. He jokingly calls himself a recovering instructional designer. So all those questions, he'll definitely be able to represent us there. And please keep questions coming in the chat. It's way more fun to see things come from you. We can pivot and go lots of different directions today. So please keep this as interactive as possible. High-level agenda. We're going to start with calling out some of the common issues and misconceptions that we see when we're talking to people out there today of what we expect generative AI to be able to do and where it falls down. And spoiler alert, the two areas that we're going to talk about where it falls down are around high quality data and how you get data in the right shape for AI. And then how do you apply agents to help scale the output of what you're able to do with AI to get reliably high quality outputs. We'll share some examples of how we're doing it. We'll attempt a live product demo, and then we'll end with kind of a broader topic of how do we actually rethink the way we do the work. One of the big issues we see is people look at the current process and figure out where do I add AI into that current process. But what if you actually think about, can I do that process differently? And we'll share some examples of how we're thinking about that as well. So, without that, further ado, let's kick off with a quick poll here, Liz, if you don't mind. Oh, you're right on it. I'm calling out some Gartner hype cycle um, kind of steps here. If people aren't familiar with it, when they evaluate technology, it starts at the innovation side, hits the peak of inflated expectation, through the trough of disillusionment. Oh my goodness, it didn't do everything. And then you start to navigate up the slope of enlightenment into the plateau of productivity. I'm kind of curious from everyone on here, where are you now when you're thinking about generative AI and AI adoption? As you're thinking about that, I'd be interested to see where people kind of pit in here. So let's go ahead and let people answer those results. Liz, I'm not able to see the results coming in, so let me know if we think we get a good thing and we can just close the poll.
Yeah, I'm gonna give everybody about 5 more seconds. We're a little slow this morning or afternoon, depending, but here are the results.
All right. We've got a good split here. A lot of people on the slope of enlightenment. That's great. I'm sorry you had to go through that disillusionment of it not doing everything that you thought it would do there. Um, but that's great. And there's still some peak of inflated expectations. So that's okay as well. I think knowing how to flatten that curve is going to help you as you start to think about the adoption. So that's useful information. Hopefully, everyone will get some value out of what we're going to talk through today. So thank you for sharing that poll. So let's get into some of these kind of current misconceptions. I'm sure we're in conversations every day. We hear this rising expectation. We need to do more with less. We have less people, less budget, less time. How do we do more with it? And one of the first places we turn is but the is how do I use I'm going to use the term generic AI tools here, but I don't mean that in a bad way at all. I think what I'm calling out here are Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, kind of I'll say the chat clients that we have out there today. Because there's some challenges as you start to use them. They're immensely powerful, but how you use them matters, especially in kind of the L&D world. Because anyone that's gone into it and said, build me a course and watched it write words, once you get past the party trick of seeing those words, you realize that it probably isn't good L&D. It's not good. It's boring, generic kind of content. And these are kind of where we see these big challenges falling in. One is this misconception in our mind that you can take an AI engine and point it at a large pool of data. Think all the courses in your LMS or your entire SharePoint library, and it's going to make sense of that, understand what's going on. It doesn't, sadly, that doesn't work. You're going to see a lot of things kind of not reliably come out on those outputs there. So that kind of is a big misconception. We see the I'll say lack of instructional design subject matter expertise kind of built in, which is leading to mediocre outputs. That kind of party trick that I was talking about. Hey, how do I make it write good assessment questions? How do I help it write good learning objectives? And a lot of that comes into prompting, but also a lot of it's able to be kind of that built into what everyone now is talking about agents, where you can build that expertise into those agents to help you kind of scale the outputs of what you're able to generate with that. So I imagine most people on here have probably heard some other challenges there. If anyone has any other ones they want to toss in the chat to share with the audience, please feel free to do it. These are kind of big buckets, and we're going to jump into kind of things to think about as we start to address that. And the first place we're going to start is kind of understanding the data, the inputs of what is the AI model going to look at. And we're going to talk about, or the large language models are going to look at, and we're going to talk about some issues we see with people. The first is not all knowing your data. Not all data is high quality or correct. We see this very quickly happening with like, hey, let me point this at SharePoint, or let me point a bot at my LMS and scrape across it. Turns out you might have content with contradicting information there. old information from different years of things that's there. And sadly, AI is not going to know what's wrong or what's incorrect about that information. So it it's really important to know what you're pointing it at. And the wonderful Matt Donovan has graced us. Hi, Matt. Thank you for making it here. It's good to see you. And feel free to jump in at any point. I already introduced you as a recovering instructional designer, so if you want to add any more, please feel free.
Oh, I think that's good to get started with. I'm sure I'll add some more color as we go.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're talking through kind of understanding our data here. The next part is consider the context. A lot of tools don't necessarily understand learning content. That could be as tactical as not being able to like read an e-learning package, a SCORM file, XAPI, AICC package that you might have. It sees that as code, not the content that's in there. And we'll get to another one of like even the content in a course matters. Like quiz questions, for example, distractors, bad information that will definitely be there and can mislead AI to give you all these things are considerations or what gonna basically give you worse quality outputs or not reliable outputs. The formats of it matter. We've seen this over and over again with tables. Tabular data, people love structured data. It's really great to read as a human. Turns out large tables like aren't that great for AI to parse through. It can lose the context of what's going on inside tabular data. Now, the good news is there's solutions to that. Taking screenshots of tables and using the multimodal features that exist inside of some of these models can actually help improve the relevance of it. Because if you just upload a table, all it's doing is parsing all the words out. And it can lose the context of which columns and which rows those words get in, especially in bigger tables, which can lead to inconsistent results. The format of the data definitely matters. Bias in the data matters. I think that matters. You're never going to be able to get rid of it or eliminate bias in all the things that are there. So it's more about kind of being aware of what's there and what's going to kind of shape the results of what are opinions that are in there and how are those opinions going to cause the large language model to either agree with that and amplify that or maybe argue with it, depending how you prompt it. So being aware of the bias of the content that you're putting in there, because you're not going to be able to eliminate it so that you can account for that becomes really important. Matt, anything you want to add on bias? I know you and I have talked about this a lot when it comes to the quality of the data.
And I think, this a little bit of this kind of comes back into, we talked about the recovering instructional designer. And I think one of the roles that we have as folks that are thinking about data inputs in this, as I use tools to help create new things with this, being aware of the bias in the data set as I'm generating new outputs with it, it becomes a new emerging function or skill set of the actual instructional designer or the designers and the developers that we move forward. But understanding the very nature of bias, not all bias is bad or unnecessary, and you cannot eliminate bias. But what you do need to understand is how bias affects your desired impact, your outputs. And you have to start to craft some skills around thinking about how do I find it, fix it, and then not only that, sustainably enable that over time. So it is one of those things that's really important for folks to begin to grow their depth and ability to do this.
Yeah, good call out. I kind of teased this one already, but we've seen this one backfire on several customers, people, if you're not aware of it. If you load in assessment data, for example, the majority of assessment data is distractors, is the wrong information. AI doesn't know that those are distractors. So be very cautious as you're loading in content that might have assessment data in there. And the final one here, which is one of my favorite ones, even if all the data you're working off of is true, it can still make bad combinations. True statement plus true statement doesn't always equal new true statement. And you want to be aware of what you're working off of. And those are those kind of human moments of being able to anticipate that and be able to review that. Um, I think there was a question around kind of good bias. I think
Mastering. Yeah.
you're addressing that one there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think when you talk about it at the tech level, it's like the large language model has so much data in it that you're sometimes the term and the technical word is used, you bias the prompts to help it focus its narrow its scope down. So you want it to be biased in instructional design practices and what's there. So it's not always the kind of the bad bias in a way. You could be aware of that and you can use that to help get more reliable data sources.
So I put the
Everyone,
example in
go
there
ahead.
around like as an example of a natural bias. We made weight in the data set, an established best practice versus an emerging best practice. Both are important to acknowledge, but depending on what I'm using it from an instructional or performance improvement standpoint, I may prefer to use one over the other depending on what my intended outcome within it. And so that data set I'm pulling in to build or generate out of may have those natural elements within it. So that's an example that I think kind of sets that up. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. I interrupted you.
No, that's a great one to clarify. Everyone loves a good stat. I think this one's probably a little high in my opinion, but it is interesting of like how important the the time is you spend up front of shaping and cleaning and preparing your data to get those reliable results. This becomes really important. I see someone in chat already talked about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. The shape of the data matters so much for making RAG reliable and to give you those high quality results out of it and not just be randomly guessing at different relevancies every time and pulling different information in. So focus on shaping that data. And I think in our L&D training world, we're sitting on troves of it now. We have that knowledge information in the learning, in the operating procedures, in the stuff that we're doing. So we can be in the driver's seat of helping shape that and make that as AI friendly as possible so that we can use it down the line. We'll give you some examples of how that works in a little bit. Everyone's probably on here heard the word agent a lot. It's the I don't know, the buzzword of 2025 for sure, of how do you think about agentic working of using agents with AI. So I thought it might make sense to lay out a diagram here of a simple looking agent and the core components that play into it. So we can start to think about how we can build these ourselves, whether you're building them as GPTs in ChatGPT, Copilot Studio, share. There's lots of tools out there. I think Box is launching a lot of their agentic stuff as well. Tools to start to think about kind of creating these agents. But you can think about the agent being all the green parts in the middle. And an agent has like an orchestrator and an understanding of what its task or goal is. It has a sequence of steps, LLM call. Think of those as prompts in essence that it's going to do something. And then it has a synthesizer, something to pull it all together before, and maybe even review it before it spits out what that output is. So an example here of, let's say I want to take a VTT file, a video transcript, and I want to create some assessments on that. If I didn't use an agent, say I just loaded that video transcript into ChatGPT and said, build me assessments, it's going to grab random facts out of that VTT and give you really random assessment questions on things that might not be relevant. But a way to improve that might be, okay, the first step is actually process the transcript, understand the key topics, the areas that are in there, next step, detect or generate what the learning objectives or outcomes should have been for that piece of that video that we're looking at. Then, final step, with examples of what good assessments, create assessment questions that align to those learning outcomes or learning objectives that we're working. Doing it like this is going to reliably give you much higher quality results on the output of what you're doing. So, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add into this one, and I think so there was a question in there that said, also, can AI help us with preparing data? And I think when you talk about the agent, it's a great example. I don't know if you shared the example of like the metadata generator as an example of an applied agent and looking at, say, for example, it can look at tens, hundreds, thousands of courses, and AI can look at like a WBT and it can go through and it can look at it and it can generate a recommendation for an abstract to go back into the LMS. Here's recommended learning objectives and those things. So you get consistent quality data. So that's an example of an agent that is intended to help look at a data set, make recommendations on metadata around it to help kind of clean up. So just out of the box, it would even improve the search coming for the LMS itself. But that's an example of where one simple example of where AI can help that task of help cleaning up or enabling or setting up that data. That's just one of many. So
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll share that in a second. How you can absolutely use AI through all of these things. To wrap up my agent thing, agents are going to talk to each other. It's a little meta, but good agentic design has agents that evaluate themselves. So you define those criteria, the QA criteria that you would already have, build those into a series of agents, and then build those loops so that you can start to have the agents even get better before that output gets in there. So in what we're doing, we're building review agents for all the agents that we do, like assessment things like that, and it's evaluating what it creates. And if it's not a high enough quality before a user ever sees it, it does a couple revs on that to get better. And that is part of kind of the architecture you can think of when you're thinking about agents and how you can apply them. So how does this work in L&D world? We kind of see this like, how do I do more, better, faster? And how do I start to use AI to do that? The first part of it is you can actually use a series of parser agents, agents that are set up to understand and deconstruct existing content or learning content to help you normalize and structure that data into reusable segments, to tag it, to generate consistent metadata, skill tags. I think I even have skill tags, skill data on here. So you can use it to help create those trusted knowledge bases of content. So it can absolutely help you shape that information. Then once you have that trusted, good, not structured knowledge, you can start to create, and I'll blow out the rest of this, kind of create new with a series of output agents. Maybe you use an assessment output agent that has that expertise built in, or I want to write a podcast or a video script or content for an instructor led presentation, or even like end learner chat experiences or blends. So you have lots of ways to kind of think about how, and Matt, maybe you want to talk a little bit about like the moments of learning need and how we can actually, this allows us to scale in a lot of ways to meet people where they need it.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that you start off with this really great, let's say I start off with a 30-minute compliance course. And one of the things we know is that, 30 minutes on a compliance topic doesn't always create, compliant behavior. But imagine if you're able to kind of then take that base course, but be able to start to create out, pulse out reinforcement messages over the year. Or like, for example, if you're teaching phishing and information security and you needed to update it, you could, instead of re-enrolling the whole entire course, you could pulse out subsections of that to when you're applying it, when something changes, when something goes wrong. What it allows you to do is to quickly scale off of really good content for those other moments of learning need without having to handcraft each of those every time. Humans are always in the loop, validating, making sure it's applied, but the idea is that this gives you a big lift from having to start from scratch to build it.
Yeah, and it's repurposing existing content. It's helping that. I think that's actually a stat here from IBM around how organizations, by using AI to help them repurpose legacy materials, are able to save a substantial amount of time because there's a lot of good knowledge locked up in that existing learning content or those existing hour-long recorded enablement sessions you have. The amount of hour-long Teams meetings that I'm sure most organizations have, where really smart people have said lots of valuable stuff that I promise you no one's ever watching those hour-long recordings. There's so much of that there, and AI can help you start to unlock a lot of that stuff to really drive some efficiencies. And Matt, this is the stat that kind of pulls into the human plus. Harvard actually kind of reviewed that there's actually an improved outcome in what the trainings went when it was a human plus AI equation versus just a fully automated or fully human approach. So the human plus is actually going to drive higher quality outcomes than even fully automated, which I think is kind of the big takeaway for me from that study, which is validating. We've been saying it, and I think we all believed it, but sometimes I think everyone's like, it's going to take everyone's job and replace all the humans. I think it's the human plus equation is really what's driving this. All right, so I am going to attempt to do a quick live demonstration here to kind of show us a little more of sort of what this looks like. And what I'm going to show is a product inside of GP that we've built called Content AIQ, which is a series of agents that have that expertise and everything that we talk to built in. Matt, are you able to see my screen here?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. Off to a good start here. So at the core, well, first off, everything that we've built here is all built in the secure Microsoft Azure tech stack. So it's all dedicated instances. Data is never used for training. We're taking advantage of all the Microsoft security and permissions that are there. But the idea is that you do have a file library where you can load or link to or use APIs to bring in content. And in essence, what the tool's doing, like here's an e-learning thing on fraud awareness, is it's chunking up and understanding that content. It is, if you load in skill taxonomies, it is tagging it to that. One thing that we realized, and one of the best practices that, again, a skill tagging agent can implement, is to get higher quality results, we asked it to provide confidence scores, but then also to provide written reasoning of why it associated that skill to that piece of content. And this is a bug in the UI, but provide the actual pages in the document or in the e-learning that it found that reference. And this did two things. It, one, actually did improve the quality of the results. This is the whole like show your work moment for AI, prompt chaining, those sort of things laid in. But then also the humans, it helped build trust in the system. So I could read that, agree with it, or if I didn't, I could send it back and tell it to try again in a different way. So you're using some of these kind of processing agents to kind of understand what's going on. Now, documents are great, but in most cases, learning the content exists across lots of different documents that are there that can have contradicting information. So we introduced a concept of knowledge bases, and I'll stick on this leadership concept we have on accountability. So I can point it towards a bunch of content. And what fed this was instructor-led ILT content guides and things like that. And it asked AI to the question about, can AI help you process the data? AI absolutely came up with all the core topics that are here. A human validated that those are the right moments. And then it actually broke down all that detailed information. And we make this human editable. So if it got something wrong, it could actually, you can correct that before you start to build all that derivative art downstream. So that kind of becomes really important to making sure you have reliable content. And you can chat with this. So I could say, like, what are the core principles of the X model? And this will answer questions based only on the information that I've loaded in. This kind of becomes your virtual SME as you think about it, but also becomes a great way for you to validate the information that's in here and build trust around that kind of downstream component. So you see, again, it cites the sources and I can click on those and say, okay, it was actually in this ILT deck on page 13 where it talked about this. And if it got it wrong, I can go correct that information before I go start using it to create downstream derivative work. And this becomes really important to validating that knowledge and making sure that's right. When we get into kind of working with it, grounding that becomes really important. In AI world, you'll hear the term grounding a lot. What's your ground truth? What are you working off of? So we created a concept called workspaces where I can ground it based on a knowledge base or specific files so that everything I do in here is only based off of that information. So whether I'm chatting and asking it for ideas to conduct exercises, or I'm using the output agents to start to create assessments, or Matt will create a quick intro video script. You can start to create these. And this is an example of one of these agents where we have the expertise kind of built in. So you'll notice it actually comes back and asks me some questions first, like before it goes off and starts writing a video script. Hey, what should it be about? What are the learning objectives? What is some of that kind of content? And let me, I have a prompt I can put in here just so I don't, I don't have to watch me type. And we can then kind of put that and let it go off and start generating that content. So when we talk about kind of what's inside an agent, I'm going to let this one kick off for a second. I'll show you a little behind the scenes because I think there were some questions around kind of a AIQ. So this, if I go into this, like these are actually, this is a loop doc, but these are actually the prompt chains that are going into this whole process. So the first thing we start is identifying topics. And again, you see we're giving it examples of what we want. Learning objectives. We have a bunch of learning and training people on the call. We want to anchor it. In this case, we want to like bias it towards using the Bloom's learning taxonomy and the verbs that are there. We're giving it the structure of how we do this. When we're writing video scripts, again, we're giving it the review checklist. All of this sort of stuff becomes really important to generating higher quality results. And I'll, as I can you write the rest of the script. It got a little stuck here. Hopefully it will write that for me. And it will go generate that. And the idea here is that you have this kind of chat with experience, because sometimes like just like that, AI gets hung up. It gets stuck in where it is, and it needs a little kind of coaxing or a human to say, okay, do this, change that, do that. And this is kind of that chat with experience that I'll say is similar to kind of what Pages is doing in Copilot or Canvas is in ChatGPT, where you get to start to kind of chat with these outputs. And if Matt has permission, Matt can come in here and kind of edit or tweak all of these. And as I expand this, you'll start to see like this is the kind of the expertise that's built in, where it's giving me the narration, the visual cues, all of the content that's kind of needed to create a high quality video. And this is the benefit of using agents, because you could do this with really good prompts using those tools, but doing it consistently and at scale is going to be a hard way to do it. So this is how you get from that peak of inflation, like through that trough of disillusionment, like to get to the productivity curve is having to be able to do something in a repeatable fashion. And here's my video script, and I'll just say then I could use maybe another agent to send that over to Colossian or Synthesia, a synthetic video tool that then will go create that video for me. So there's lots of options you can do here, but Matt, I know you've been kind of fielding questions. Any questions popping up here that we should field as this might work? Live demos are always fun.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in here. I think one was, and Robert asked this question about the idea of creating a gold standard knowledge base, versus trying to go back in this huge effort of trying to cleanse a back catalog of questionable content. And I think it's a really good point in the sense that one of the things we know that coming into a tool like this is that the quality of our data in our organizations we know is going to be a challenge. So there's always going to be a factor of data cleansing. But the beauty is that as you bring it in, you can start that process. You don't have to have it all 100% done before you get through it. As you were working with the data here, you're actually going back and cleaning it up. It's all about managing and prioritizing when, where, and how you want to have this, but understand the very nature that some of your data sources will be weaker, some will be stronger, and the power is knowing when and where those are. And I think that's when you look at this. And what you're seeing here is that scalability to be able to bring something forward that a designer then can move up the value chain to be able to look into different modalities, different durations, different flow, etc., to be able to do it rather than having to craft from scratch. So you can build on it. Sometimes it's going to be a 40% lift. Sometimes it'll be a 70% lift to getting that you're going to benefit from. So
Yep, absolutely. And I see some things like AI gets tired. That's where those reviewer agents become in. So whether it's like reminding it of what its job is and keeping it going. And you saw an example here where this didn't even work the first two times. There are some things where things get hung up. This is all new, very kind of new tech. But again, it created a video here in a matter of seconds. Where we could publish out an interactive video where this synthetic human will read it to us. So I want to go back to this kind of slides here because I want to sort of share this idea of these are how you could start to apply these agents from the inputting to the outputting. And you can use a framework like AIQ you do it with a bunch of GPTs or Copilot Studio. Like you don't have to use our tool to do this. There's lots of ways to think about how you embed that expertise into these agents, because that becomes how you scale the process. You're never going to teach everyone to be a prompt expert in all the things that are there. So building the agents helps that part of it. So let me click back to my slides here, and we'll
While you're
kind of,
clicking back, I think this is really one of the key things of why having a data strategy is so important as you start to bring AI tools to bear, is because your data source becomes one of your biggest assets, but cultivating it, cleaning it, but doing it strategically over time, there's a lot of energy behind that. But AI will only be as good. If you think of AI as the engine, data is the fuel that fuels that engine. It's only as good as what it is. And then the human's the driver outside that really pulls the performance from those systems. So anyway, go
yeah.
ahead, Jeff. I know you've got it pulled up here.
No, this is I mean, your timing's perfect, and the wisdom part of that. This is like a very tactical example of how do you take an hour-long brown like session that is recorded of someone talking, and how do I make that into smaller pieces of content? And this was an example of, okay, maybe I use AIQ to actually look at that, understand the core topics, provide the suggested edits. We give it to a human to actually make the edits in the video. Use AI to generate the content that would go into the learning, like all the stuff that goes around it, titles, descriptions, learning objective, assessment questions, leave behind, job aids, all of that. And then a human ID puts that into an e-learning course or puts that into the delivery tool that's there. It gets reviewed and then published into an LMS or LXP or things like that. So we're kind of rethinking the process of where you start to use AI as part of that and really accelerate what people are able to do.
Jeff, what's embedded in here around that wisdom, and I
Yep.
think it's going back here, one of the things that's important, it's not just an out-of-the-box GPT. Part
Yeah.
of what you're wrapping around here is the wisdom of what it means in this case to create a good script. And so that's part of the lived experiences of the design team we have. But if you're building your own, you're pouring your wisdom, your human wisdom into this system. That's where you get into the details. Pay more attention to this, pay less attention to that, focus on this. Like in the assessment generator set, we had a rubric of 30 guidelines on how to create a really good assessment question. And that's what differentiates that kind of insight plus the great prompt allows us to get to a really good assessment on the back end. So there's this underlying element of how you bring that in to get to more consistently good outputs that the humans are tweaking less and less more predictably because the inputs are getting better as you're going through with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always love good stats. Again, increased time savings. The idea to me here is this is elevating us out of I'll say the delivery of content or creating the content and bringing us to that higher level problem solving, strategic, giving us more time to focus on those higher value moments. Matt, let me toss this to you. This is always, I love your definition of this and how we think about intelligence versus wisdom in fruit salad versus AI as well.
Well, and I think kind of going back to the process is, in the sense that we fully believe philosophically, and you'll see that as an example, Jeff was demoing a tool, and you see our philosophy in this is that we believe that there has to be this balance between human and AI to drive these outputs, scaling our expertise to no end. But people often say, well, what's my role versus AI's? And I think that the example is that AI will bring scaled intelligence far beyond what humans will do, but what humans will bring is the wisdom. And the example way we have this so is that intelligence, for example, is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad, for example. And that's one of the ways in which the tools consistently get better is when the humans are interacting with it, getting it to do things. What we've seen actually is that AI tools outputs will actually degrade over time without human input into it. There are great examples of people were doing like a look back comparison between October of 2022, and I tried to have the tools in 2022 create an image, and then I came forward in late 2024, I did the exact same prompt, and look at the difference between these two. There was either Malik did an otter flying a plane or flying in a plane, and it was so much richer, so different. a lot of people assume that there was all these, brilliant AI algorithm experts back there fixing the algorithm. Honestly, what the biggest factor in that growth was a gabillion humans interacting with the tool to tell it this is right, this is wrong, this is better, this is not better. All of those interactions help it get better what that is. And for these tools to really work, you have to work with them. Unfortunately, one of the trends we're seeing, and there's a statistic around this, is that as people get more comfortable with AI, actually we're seeing a trend where their critical thinking about the outputs is dropping. And this is something we need to make sure that we continue to bring to be the humans in the human plus AI system with that. So these tools are only as good as the folks using the tools with them and the data that you're putting into it. I think with this one here, when you look at the roles of this, as we start to rethink about how we bring in that human plus AI, we're thinking about where can we use these AI agents, that agentic approach to be able to take a look at the work we're doing, the tasks, the activities of the work, and where can we use AI to automate, to bring in for generation or to do prediction or large scale data analytics. And the idea is being able to bring those in and apply them into rethinking the very work that we're doing. And just examples that Jeff was kind of pulling through are all examples in the L&D circle, but it's not just learning and development activities, but it's also across the business as well. We start to look at AI not just as a tool, but as an assistant, a peer, and a manager as well. So I think it's important as we start to go thinking about whatever the future applications of those agents are, we're keeping this in mind as we start to integrate them into the work we do. I think it brings us to the next slide, which is really just taking an example of a workflow. So I talk about looking at the work that we do, whether we're learning and develop designers or we're in a marketing and analyst in a marketing position, we need to take a step back and look at the work. So here's an example of thinking about performance conversations. And so a manager to an employee, and thinking about knowing that everybody has these, either you're having a conversation with your manager or your manager having them with that. But the idea is, how could we change the workflow in this? And I've got 9 steps here identified in this. And where could we start to bring in AI to really make this experience different or better? So the human doesn't always have to remember, doesn't have to schedule, can be aided in collecting the feedback. So we can start to look at AI agents that says, hey, Matt, in this quarter, I noticed that you don't have a one-on-one set with Tom. Would you like me to go schedule with it? It has access to our calendars. It's able to say, I know that Tom has worked with these 10 people, and I know you'd like to ask these 5 questions. Who out of these 10 would you like me to go ask these 5 questions? It goes and collects feedback from Tom's peers. It anonymizes, summarizes it, sends it to me. And then it goes out and pulls the prior documentation for our performance conversation. But it also says, hey, we know you have LinkedIn Learning. Let me send you, I know there's a new real quick podcast or learning component out here on the topic of having a great conversation. Let me share that with you as well. So my AI agent is helping me do this. It's also looking out there in space and saying, hey, there are some other great managers out there who are having some great conversations. Would you like me to set up a potential micro mentoring or micro coaching conversation as you're heading into your conversation with Tom? Then I have my great conversation with Tom at step number 7. And as we're doing that, it could actually transcribe the meeting. It could call out action items. It's going to complete it. I approve it. Of course, there's a human in every step here, but once I'm comfortable with it, once Tom is comfortable with it, it completes and files it. And then it sets up nudging for now in my next conversation. The challenge here is that from an agentic standpoint, how can we start to bring in these AI to change the workflow to create an era of improved performance? Not just did I train the humans to have a better conversation, but I'm actually enabling the likelihood that we're going to have a great conversation with it. So it's not just the examples of the agents we put here, but how we're actually pulling that in. So I just kind of wanted to leave with that bigger picture of as we take a step back and look at the overall role of agents. So
Yeah, this is all great, Matt. I think that we're right on time to kind of sort of wrap this up and take a couple other questions we have. I mean, for me, the biggest things I want to kind of focus people on are the quality data is crucial. Like, spend the time to make sure that you know the data that the AI engines you're using are working off of. Not necessarily the training data, but what are they pointed at? Most of the tools allow you to do some sort of RAG experience now. What data is it using, and how is that data deconstructed and validated that's there? And then figuring out how to embed expertise into a series of agents that help you generate the outputs, because that's how you're going to get to that productivity gain, just being able to scale the use of it. And it's not going to be in single chat prompts. It's going to be in the use of agents that allow you to scale those things. Matt, anything you want to kind of leave people with?
No, I mean, I just said a couple of folks were saying, hey, you know, the agent thing is a little bit confusing. And I say, get it. This is a new way of thinking about how we bring it in here. Don't worry, just lean in to learn more about it. So like Copilot Studio is a place that allows you to go create these applied Copilot agents, for example, which is prompts, some of those data insights, a data source, and an action with that. So building these bots will be or these agents will be part of our future of what we're doing. Don't panic if you don't know about it, but lean in and learn more about it. And I encourage you to go out and try and build your own little bot to help you out. Build your own little agent for a task or activity with that. Explore, experiment.
Absolutely. Right on time. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. And thank you, Liz, for having us. And thank you, everyone, for the great conversation. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was honestly a really great conversation. I expect your guys' emails to blow up after this, continuing the conversation, which is always a fantastic thing. So thank you so much, gentlemen. For everyone else, though, I did see some questions on slides, recordings. I just wanted to reiterate, yes, everything is being recorded and will be shared in a follow-up email from us as well as on site. Some of our sessions will have the PowerPoint with it. We do have some proprietary information for some. So for this particular session, yes, you'll get the PDF version that will also be a part of the email. So for everyone else, we will be taking that 14-minute break as mentioned. We do have our next session with Scott and Carmen joining us for Human versus AI. Who should design and deliver presentations? ? So just in a moment, I will end this session. You can join our next session by returning to that event lobby and going to the session tab. So please stick around for our next session, which will begin at the top of the hour. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.